The age-old martial versus caster debate has a very simple answer, though one that most probably don't want to hear. Fantasy settings, particularly those inspired by Tolkien and D&D, need their magic to come with serious, ideally irreparable, consequences. Fantasy does tend to have some consequences with its magic, but it's more often than not depicted like... how do I put this? Like a spiritual ammo, rather than a genuine sacrifice. D&D's spell slot system is the most common one for tabletop, and it sucks. Sorry, that came out bluntly, but it's true. Wizards can cast spells that have effects like no one has ever seen before, and the only cost for it is that they need to go EP afterwards, like they're narcoleptic. If you want the world you're playing in to be believable and grounded, magic needs serious repercussions, or it is very likely that you're going to run into a high fantasy problem. If magic is easily accessible, why does the world still look like medieval Europe? A period of history where 95% of people spent almost all of their time just making food. If you can do something as simple as cast a rainstorm, farming just became so easy that it will have so many knock-on effects for the rest of the world. With more food, there will be a population boom, which leads into technological and industrial growth, and so on. If you gave high fantasy magic to a medieval society, they would get to where we are in the modern day in an embarrassingly small fraction of the time. Even if magic's power is hoarded behind grand wizards, it doesn't really fix this problem. Just because the Gandalf LARPer can only cast half a dozen spells a day does not make a setting low fantasy. Wizards being able to exist at all as a full-time job is not a good sign. For one, a spell is such a broad term that it can mean a lot of things, but usually those things break the laws of physics. Being able to cast just one a day, or even one a week, is a lot of chances to break the laws of physics. Most of us, like normal people, don't even get one of those in our entire lives. It's important to take a step back and ask what the magic that these people are casting actually is. Usually fantasy tends to have a handful of magical explanations. It's Star Wars, it's science, or it's divine intervention. Not necessarily mutually exclusively from each other. The magically inclined are typically either casting from the Force, through preparation, or by God. The mere existence of any of these things is going to drastically change how people perceive the world, the superstitions that would arise, and the fundamental way that people interact with life and death. In almost every fantasy setting that I've ever seen, there is a guaranteed provable afterlife. That alone is huge! Death would be seen and treated the same way as we see graduating from teenager to adult. It's basically just another part of one's life. Or, not life, I guess one's journey? See, even basic language, insofar as how we refer to our very existence, is going to have to change. There would be no more wondering how your ancestors feel about you when you can just, dig up their corpse and ask them. If you can prove God exists by smiting someone with his power, the enlightened Reddit atheists of the world are basically like moon landing deniers. And if you can cast unimaginable physics-warping spells from smushing together random ingredients, every government on the face of the planet is going to be pumping money into think tanks that do nothing except theorize what random crap might possibly cause calamity. Magic often finds itself very segregated from the rest of the world. There are the wizards that control it, and the peasants who are subject to their whims, but that's not really how it works? I think it's easy to overlook just how powerful and influential a government can be. Governments in the real world are always looking for every tool they could possibly use to further their position, every wire they could twist, all of the stock markets that they could collapse with a tweet. Sometimes they're looking to further the goals of the nation, other times merely the goals of the leaders. But regardless, those with magical acumen represent such a powerful force that no government that prioritizes its existence over human rights, e.g. all of them, is gonna let a wizard just live their life unbothered and unimpeded. The court sorcerer is not gonna be there by choice. They're there because the government that they serve is probably holding their family hostage as leverage in case they don't comply. Magic is not something you can lightly introduce because, by its very nature, it's fundamentally breaking the laws of physics. And that's a power that everyone with their head on straight is going to want to exploit, whether it comes from the arcana, from ritual, or from God. This is assuming that magic is simple, which it doesn't have to be. When the whole equation to getting to a fireball is to wave your hand around, go biggledy-biggly-boo, and watch a techno-colored orb form in your palm, it's oddly underwhelming, but it doesn't have to end there. See, I find it best to think of magic using people rather than the other way around. Sometimes people can make themselves obvious enough, like a lightning rod, to get the attention of a spark, but no matter what, their body is not going to be prepared for it, and they will feel the consequences of that lightning shooting through them, especially if repeatedly struck. There are plenty of potential extra costs to using magic, the most classic probably being age. Fantasy loves its wise old men, and so it's only natural for using magic to get you there faster. It gives every cast a deep sense of guilt, knowing the effects are not necessarily immediate, but deeply regrettable once the Reaper shows himself to the addled sorcerer, alone and desperate for company. Another would be sacrificing your physical form. I once had a player whose character was a necromancer, the cost for his power being his own body. Being relatively early on in his career, it hadn't affected him that much. He only needed to never be seen without gloves, and he never needed to be reminded of the cost that he wrought, as every time he looked down at his palm, he would see only bone. Perhaps once his career grew extensive enough, he'd make a very natural lich. There's also the classic of losing yourself, with you gradually giving away your own mind as you reach deeper into the arcana, melding closely with it like falling into a river. This can be hard to do well though, and it's a rather wishy-washy penalty, so I don't really like it that much. I personally think the best way to handle this is treating magic kind of like intense bursts of radiation. If used without proper protection or blessing, you're probably dead, and even if you do, it's still not exactly going to be good for you, especially if you keep doing it on the regular. It'll lead to cancer, first off, but it's not all bad. Think about how useful a third arm might be. Maybe the Cult of Adam were just really big into magic in their day. If you have other suggestions for what you could sacrifice for magic, the comment section is right down there. Even if this video is old, people are going to be looking down in those comments for inspiration for a long time from now. I feel the need to emphasize, as I did in the video that this is a direct sequel to, that this does not limit a writer's options for creativity. In reality, it actually expands upon them on top of serving as an inbuilt explanation for why the world is the way that it is. Why did the wizard not simply shower the peasants below her with food so abundant that she would be crowned king? It was not merely out of selfishness, a shitty excuse in its own right, but because said wizard was quite fond of her mortality and not willing to let go of it just yet. But remember, people are no hive mind. Not everyone is going to practice magic in the same way, nor have its sting manifest in exact, identical fashions. People may sacrifice different things based on how they cast, and even say across, say, the same deity, both what they get and how it affects them may differ based on region. Maybe there really is a group out there who uses magic like wild, regardless of the effects that it causes. Just off the top of my head, those could be crazy mutated cultists, a messed up government project, or simply people who didn't know any better. There's a lot of ways to go with just that little idea alone. If you played a tabletop role-playing game like D&D, you're probably going to immediately ask how to actually integrate any of this. Unfortunately, Dungeons & Dragons does not handle magic very well, as I mentioned earlier, as it treats spells more like a magic ammo rather than substantial physics-altering aberrations. It's taking magic from a very gameplay-sided view, which is totally fine, actually. For the game that it wants to be, spell slots are an okay system, even if they're needlessly complicated and worse than a generic mana system, but it does serve the design goal that they had in mind, to facilitate dungeon crawling, even if it makes every wizard come off like a narcoleptic. The casualty of this design, though, is that it ends up catapulting the chance of their systems being believable directly into hell. Magic, as it's depicted in these systems, is so incredibly powerful that it would absolutely shake up everything, but that's not the focus, so it's hand-waved away, which, again, is totally fine. The advice in this video should only really be taken by those looking to make a grounded world, not those looking to play an off-the-shelf D&D module. Well, I say that, but D&D is, and pretty much always has been, suffering with the monolithic divide between casters and marshals. In other words, wizards and swordsmen. The guy that can cast a gigantic go-fuck-yourself ball of guaranteed damage is probably going to win against the guy that can swing a sword twice. They're ideally not going to be fighting each other, so it seems like a nothing problem, until you actually play as a marshal alongside casters, and feel so remarkably useless. I got to experience this again recently in one of my games, even though it was set in the modern day. One of my players was essentially a psyker, and the rest were various secret forces types. Even in a totally different setting, that divide came right back. With the whole crew of specially trained elites, mind you, not like peasant farm boys, had to watch themselves get benched as their psyker showed them up at every turn. The person it was the least fun for was the psyker themselves, who expressed how extremely stressful it was to be making all of their friends essentially obsolete by being so universally applicable. No amount of homebrew rules or nerfs could really fix how incredibly useful it was to just be able to say to someone, "Tell me what I want to know," and get a truthful answer. Marshals do tend to get fancy stuff at the higher, nigh unplayable levels, but it still doesn't compare to the classic interplanetary teleport that their equivalent gets. A significant reason there is such a huge divide between them is because the solutions that casters apply to problems are just as simple as the ones that marshals use. An archer lets loose an arrow from their drawn string at someone, and if it hits, it does damage. A wizard casting a spell is still just gonna end up doing damage, oftentimes not even bothering with a hit roll for some reason. And it's functionally just a range attack. It's not only the same thing, it's even better thanks to it being guaranteed damage. Apparently, channeling the Arcana is extremely consistent and doesn't come with any risk at all. There is room for it to be so much more interesting. Maybe the wizard has to scrounge around for the ritual requirements, then coax the spirits into letting him do what he wants, then get the incantation just right, and only then does the foe explode into viscera like it's Fallout. The best recommendation I've got is going to absolutely seem biased, and so don't laugh at me, but I recommend not to turn to D&D, but to XCOM 1. Enemy within psionics are a bonus added on top of a normal class, not their own class entirely like in XCOM 2. The use of psionics is pretty infrequent and situational, and doesn't really come close to overriding the character's main class identity, both because the class's usual bonuses are much more generally applicable and useful, and because shooting your gun tends to be a little bit more efficient than saying boo in etherealese. This is the classic support character problem again, and highlights exactly why I almost never play support classes. The question that you're asking yourself in character creation is this: would you rather debuff the enemy, or would you rather separate their skull from the rest of their body? As for what system, or homebrew, or post-it notes to steal it from, there is more homebrew for D&D out there than there are atoms in the universe. I'm sure you can find something out there. Or just wing it yourself, that is the most fun part after all. If you do have a solution, especially if you've actually used it in practice, I'm sure people in the comments would love to read it. Hint hint. The bottom line is that magic should come with a pretty intrinsic cost, and a sizable one at that. A very important rule for making power compelling is to make it scarce. Guns only have so many bullets, armor is going to break eventually, and a sword tends to dull on hits. They require maintenance to be kept in working order. Examples that break these conventions make them very boring. Infinite ammo, or unpenetrable armor, tend to elicit groans because they're losing exactly what makes them compelling, which is the promise of exhaustion. A mage with spell slots theoretically fulfills the same purpose, as they do have a limit, but the power that they wield can be so demonstrably more powerful than those around them that their maintenance needs to be more involved if they don't want to make everyone else around them feel completely irrelevant. Special thanks to Joseph Anderson for letting me use footage of his Baldur's Gate playthrough to save me from what would no doubt just be, just horrible misery having to play Game of the Year 2022. Thanks to my patrons, Emmy and Potato especially. Like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill, and don't forget to drink water.